Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Tiger Club of Kansas City Zoom call for Tuesday, March 30th. This is our final speaker program for the 2020-21 year. It's been a lot of fun hosting these, but I really look forward to seeing you all in person come next fall. I would like to give a shout out before we start to Darren Wydick for engineering the Zoom call throughout the year, and to Barry Cantor and Paul Blackman for lining up our great group of speakers. It's been a lot of fun. And again, we look forward to seeing you all in person. Appreciate all your viewing of the Zoom casts throughout the year. One more time, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Conrad's Restaurant and Ale House in Liberty, tigerboard.com, Chicken and Pickle in North Kansas City, Sports Scene in Lee's Summit, and Stables Grill in Kearney. Couple of quick updates on Mizzou sports. Coach Larissa Anderson's softball team has risen to number 17 in the rankings after winning a series over Auburn last weekend. And later today in Lawrence, Kansas, the Mizzou baseball team renews its rivalry with the Kansas Jayhawks. Well, it's appropriate that we conclude our speaker series with our old friend Blair Kerkhoff, the Kansas City Star. Blair recently took over the Mizzou sports beat when Soichi Terada moved to Boston to cover the Celtics. Blair needs no introduction, but I do want to compliment him on his excellent work covering Mizzou over the last few weeks, while at the same time hosting the Sports Beat podcast for the Kansas City Star. He appears weekly with Seren Petro on Thursdays on 810 WHB. And at the same time, he keeps up with the Chiefs, Royals, and other college teams. I kind of consider you, Blair, as the Da Vinci of the Kansas City sports scene. You do it all, and you do it with such an artistic flair in all your duties. So welcome.
Well, thank you, and what an honor to be the speaker for the final Tiger Club meeting of the year. You all have had some terrific speakers this year, and then you've had me. So happy to be the bookend for this one. I think this is number 3 for me this year. I think Paul wrangled me into 3 appearances this year. So, I'm always happy to do it, and love talking to Tiger fans. They are terrific, and I'm with you, Mark. I'm really hopeful that in the fall we can do this in person and see each other at JoJo's.
Well, we're always glad to have you. And I just wonder, are you sleeping much these days covering Mizzou, getting ready for the Royals, covering Chiefs free agency with all your other duties?
People wouldn't think it's terribly busy, but it is for a lot of us here at the Star because of what you just said. Free agency has become a beast in the NFL, and you're the news breaking all the time. Nothing today, I don't think, with the Chiefs, but that doesn't mean by the end of the day we won't have some news to report. And the Royals, look, 2 days away from opening day, and they've made some big news here in the last 24 to 48 hours with the demotion of Nicky Lopez, at second base, optioning him to AAA Omaha. And it looks like they're going to keep Kyle Isbell on the 26-man roster, which is pretty significant news for the Royals. But as you mentioned, college sports is my historically that's what's kept me busy throughout most of my time here at the Star, and it's kept me especially busy the last month to 6 weeks, or maybe even 2 months, with Soichi leaving Columbia to take a job in Massachusetts covering the Boston Celtics. And they just the Star believe, look, we'll get the rest of the basketball season, spring football covered with in-house personnel. That would be me mostly. So I get to spend the last 10, 12 regular season games watching the Tigers in a way that I didn't before then, and then covered their loss in the NCAA tournament to Oklahoma. And to be honest with you, it was great getting out there. And I not many people have been to Columbia for games in the last year. Just because of the limited seating, but I hadn't been over there since the 2019, 1920 football and then basketball season. So it was good to get over to Columbia a few times and just to see everybody that I've been speaking to on Zoom or over the phone with all this time. But unfortunately, I saw the the lesser half of Missouri basketball. When Suichi left him, it was, I think his last game was the Arkansas game at home where the Tigers lost in overtime, but played really well without Jeremiah Tillman. That was the first of his 2 games gone, I believe, to tend to his grandmother's funeral. But boy, I took over after that, and since then I brought him no luck at all and some bad losses, and then the 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 loss to Oklahoma in the NCAA tournament, I don't think was a disastrous loss, but from a Missouri perspective, I just thought it was a total missed opportunity for the Tigers.
You were in Indianapolis that first weekend for the tournament and at the Missouri game. You've talked a little bit about that. What was your impressions of the tournament in general, how it was handled, the atmosphere with limited number of fans?
When you think about it, this was the college basketball probably as a sport affected more than any other major sport because it lost its championship, it lost its high profile March Madness month. It was the big loser in the pandemic. So the tournament returns, but in a way that we had never seen it before, with all games scheduled for one city and limited fans in the building. It was unusual. It was odd, but I think it was handled probably the best way it could have been. It wouldn't have made sense to fly teams all around the country to Boise, to Orlando, wherever the regionals were this year, just to play a couple of games. I think it was a smart thing to do to have it all in Indianapolis, but it was strange. It was odd. Most of the teams were staying in the downtown Indianapolis area. For those that have been there, they're familiar with the area where the JW Marriott is, the Lucas Oil Stadium, the Marriott, the Westin. So you had all the teams staying in a handful of hotels, and during the day or at night, while the games were being played, you could walk the streets of Indianapolis and not see many people. There weren't a lot of fans there. The ticket sales were limited, and I talked to restaurant and bar owners who with their establishments downtown who were saying it's been terrible for business there because they didn't, the hotels were full of teams, but those teams weren't going to patronize the restaurants and the bars. So it's been a tough 3 weeks for Indianapolis. They didn't, obviously not going to have the economic impact that they would normally have by hosting either a regional or a Final Four. But the bottom line is the TV ratings are up for these games. Money is being made on college basketball, and it looks like we're going to have a national champion both on the men's and the women's side, which is great. And I don't know how excited people are for a Baylor-Houston national semifinal, but we know that one's going to happen on Saturday, and then again the 2 games tonight. So I get bottom line, I'm glad it's happening. Indianapolis was the best place for it to happen, and like everything else that we'll discuss, we hope it goes back to normal next year.
We sure do. Not going to rehash the Oklahoma game. We've talked about that last week with Jared Sutton. Since that game, of course, there's been some activity in Mizzou's transfer pool. Xavier Pinson is leaving. Interesting today, Mark Smith is decided to go to Kansas State and play another year. And then, of course, the Tigers picked up Amari Davis from Wisconsin Green Bay. I guess we see Mizzou probably trying to go after a couple other transfers, and number 1 kid on the list might be the UMKC's Brandon McKissick. Is that right?
Yeah. So he's out there, the best player for UMKC, and he's probably a Power 5 talent, Brandon McKissick. Missouri's on his list, along with Kansas and Kansas State, and a handful of others. So our Kansas writer, who's been in touch with one of our Kansas writers, who's been in touch with McKissick, seems to think that the decision will be made sometime this week. But yeah, so Missouri is a net -2 right now in terms of the transfer portal, with losing Xavier Pinson and Parker Brown and Mark Smith. Listen, Mark Smith was never coming back. He's a senior. He does have a year of eligibility, but You just you got the sense talking to these guys in the last few weeks of the regular season, and this included Drew Smith and Jeremiah Tillman, they were playing when they had senior day at Mizzou for that final home game. They were playing in their last game at Mizzou Arena. So what we didn't know at the time was which, if any, of those seniors was still thinking about playing college basketball. I thought Konzo Martin had an interesting quote with a couple weeks left, maybe a week left in the regular season, saying, he doesn't necessarily want, even if seniors want to return, he doesn't necessarily want them back because he just thinks it's time to move on, and he's doing it. The decision is based on how he feels about the players and their futures, their lives, and don't come back just to play basketball. If you're going to pursue a graduate degree, or if you're serious about your education, yes, come back. But otherwise, don't come back for just to play hoops. And I think he was referring to players like Mark Smith and Drew Smith and Tillman. Drew Buggs could probably be in that. Mitchell Smith also in that category.
Some other stuff happening around college basketball, coaching changes at Oklahoma and Texas with the retirement of Lon Kruger and Shaka Smart heading to Marquette. What are your thoughts on those, and who might be in position to fill them? I assume Texas is going to go after Chris Beard, but what do you think?
Yeah, that's been the rumor ever since Shaka Smart this weekend, when Shaka Smart took the Marquette job, that Chris Beard was target number one, and we haven't heard anything from his camp or the Texas athletic director. His name is Del Conte. He used to be the athletic director at TCU, and now he's in Austin. But I don't know who the second choice would be. With Oklahoma, the rumor, one of the more rumors going around, I guess, recently is Mark Turgeon might be interested in coming to Oklahoma, the former Kansas guard who's the Maryland coach now, that he can't seem to do enough at Maryland to satisfy the fan base there, and he might be looking. And of course, he knows this part of the country really well. So don't be shocked if we saw Chris Beard move to Texas, Mark Turgeon come to Oklahoma. But I've been asked a lot the last couple of days which job is better, and when Indiana was open before Indiana hired Mike Woodson, if you throw that one in there among IU, Oklahoma, and Texas, which one is better? And I think Indiana has of the three certainly the best basketball tradition, but it's just with Michigan and Ohio State and Purdue, they're behind in that conference now, and are still trying to fight their way back into being a regular NCAA tournament team. Texas, we all know, has the revenue. The expectations are ridiculous there. They fund their programs to win national championships in every sport. And so just getting to the NCAA tournament's never enough at Texas, as Rick Barnes found out, and Shaka Smart leaves Texas to go to Marquette, how he found out. And so that leaves Oklahoma. And to be honest with you, I think Oklahoma is the best job of the three. And I say that, first of all, because Joe Castiglione is the athletic director, and I did old Missouri AD, and spent a lot of time in Columbia. And I think the world of Joe, and he's got a terrific track record of hiring coaches, and he's one of the grand old men of college athletic administration right now. And I just think he'd be the best person to work for. They have the resources at that school. There is a winning tradition there. I think of those three, Oklahoma might be the most attractive.
And I actually worked for Joe at Mizzou in the mid-90s, and would agree. I know he'll do a great job picking his successor. Mike Woodson was a curious pick. No previous college head coaching. He's so old, he played for the Kansas City Kings. I don't know if everybody remembers that. I was really puzzled by that hire.
Went to he's sitting on the assistant coach of the Knicks, I think. When the Indiana job came open, the first candidate you heard, or at least from a fan's wish list perspective, was Brad Stevens, the old Butler coach who's been
Right.
with the Celtics now for several years. And it took a little while, maybe 36 hours, for Brad Stevens to just kind of dismiss it and say, no, 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 you don't leave the Celtics to go to Indiana. So um, Indiana's in a position where it probably thinks, the people of Indiana think more of the job than people outside of Indiana do. That it's a, when you talk about Indiana, you don't talk about it as a sleeping giant. It's kind of just the opposite. It's been a giant and it's been asleep now for a while. And I just think right now, if you're a basketball prospect and you have an opportunity, if you're interested in that part of the country, how is Indiana more attractive than Michigan or Ohio State right now? It just isn't. And given given the success of those two programs here lately, I think Indiana's got its work cut out for it to be relevant again on a national level. It's been, I think I'm right about this, since 2002 that Indiana's been to a Final Four.
That
And
was under Mike Davis, right?
Mike Davis, remember that loss
Yeah.
to Maryland and
Right.
Gary Williams in the national championship game after beating Oklahoma and Kelvin Sampson in one of the semifinals. So it's 20 years since Indiana's been to a Final Four, and that's a program that's won 5 NCAA titles. I think only UCLA and Kentucky have won more than maybe North Carolina, but Indiana's right there in the top 5 in terms of NCAA championships, but none since what 87? Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah,
Right.
87, right? Because Knight won 3 and his final one
He
came in
won
87.
76, 81, and 87. That
Right.
was the right one. So,
Right.
talking with Blair Kerkhoff, Kansas City Star. If you'd like to ask Blair a question at the end of our discussion, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. One other local basketball um, topic I'd like to touch on with you. Northwest Missouri State wins their 3rd national championship in the last 4 tournaments. Is Ben McCollum going to get a Division I job at some point?
He's put himself in a position where he can choose. He can be picky and choosy about the next job that he wants. I've talked to him about this. It's been a couple years. It was while they were pursuing the previous national championship, so 2 years ago, and there were schools that have been Division I schools that have been interested in him. And he told me that he thinks he'd be pretty comfortable in the Missouri Valley Conference, but not at every one of those schools. There would be certain schools that he would target. And keep in mind, he's an Iowa guy. He from the state of Iowa. He's only coached in the MIAA. He was an assistant at Emporia State, assistant at Northwest, and now he got the head coaching job at Northwest at age 27. And what he has done is remarkable. It may be the most remarkable thing in college basketball right now to win at the level he's winning. And anybody who saw their game on Saturday, the national championship game, just had to marvel at what he's done and the way he just demolished a quality opponent. And there was that clip that was making the rounds on social media last weekend. It was from not the championship game, but a previous game where the Bearcats offense was running so smoothly. I think they ended up with 9 or 10 passes and the ball only touched the floor 3 or 4 times. And 4 or 5 guys passed up open looks for an even more open look. And finally a guy knocked down swished an open 3-pointer. It's a beautiful thing to see. Of course, the question is going from Division II to Division I, can you recruit on that level? Will players who are recruited to the Division I level respond to that type of coaching? I'll tell you, Kim Anderson is something of a cautionary tale here, and the lack of success that he had at Missouri, coming from Central Missouri. And there were reasons why it didn't work. A lot of reasons why it didn't work out for Kim, but I'm sure when Ben McCollum has conversations with athletic directors about prospective jobs, that name will come up in the Missouri situation will be mentioned.
Final question I'm going to ask you about college basketball. Who's your national champion? Can anybody beat Gonzaga?
I don't think anybody can beat Gonzaga. When Baylor is playing great, which they did for the first 10 minutes or so last night, they're fantastic. I've seen Gonzaga play at a high level for longer than Baylor has in a game. I think this Gonzaga team kind of has a chance not only to go undefeated and be remembered as one of the great college basketball teams of recent memory. The Kentucky team of 2015 that didn't win the national championship was phenomenal. They're the Kentucky team of 12. There have been some fantastic college basketball teams in the last decade that we all can remember from NCAA tournament play. But I think if Gonzaga goes on and wins a national title, we'll remember this team as one of the great ones. And to be honest with you, Baylor and Gonzaga, that's the national championship game I wanted to see at the beginning of the year. It's the game that didn't get played in the regular season because of COVID. They were scheduled to play each other back in December. And I think it's the game we're going to see on Monday night.
Let's talk about Mizzou football. Tigers wrap up their spring practice sessions. A lot of optimism around the team, a lot of optimism around the recruiting. What do you think of the job Coach Eli Drinkwitz is doing now? He's been in the job for a little over a year.
Yeah, so far so good. What's I don't know what the complaints are. There was I know that when they lost the defensive coordinator to Illinois, that you kind of shook your head for a second, say what's going on there? Why would he make that move? But when he comes in and hires Steve Wilkes to be the defensive coordinator, I got to tell you, I was really impressed by that. Chiefs fans may or may not remember when the Arizona Cardinals played at Arrowhead Stadium in Mahomes' first year as the starter. About midway through the season, Mahomes was off to the incredible start. He was on his way to 50 touchdown passes and 5,000 yards. But Arizona comes in. Arizona's nothing. They ended up finishing 3-13 that year. They brought very little. Jeff Rosen was their quarterback, or whatever his name was, the Rosen kid. They were nothing. They came into Arrowhead Stadium and played Patrick Mahomes in that offense as well as any defense that year did. And I didn't know who the Cardinals coach was. I didn't know who he was. So I was looking him up during the game. Turns out he's Steve Wilkes, and further interested in him because he went to Appalachian State, my alma mater. And he just made such a great impression on me that day that I just thought this guy's going to be a success. Well, fired him after that year, right? And they hired Cliff Kingsbury at Arizona because they had a different idea what they wanted to do at quarterback. They knew they were going to draft Kyler Murray. But I was just I was blown away by how good that defense was. And then because of the Appalachian State connection, Wilkes got to know Eli Drinkwitz. They got together. And Wilkes, out of football this past year, was looking to get back into football. Drinkwitz was able to hire him. And I think Missouri's got just as good a defensive coordinator as you can possibly have. Now, the proof is in the pudding, right? The two great wins for Missouri last season were LSU and Arkansas, and the defense didn't play worth a flip. And for most of the game in both of those, defense came up big at the end of LSU. But defense needed to improve, and I think it will with Steve Wilkes.
I thought it was just a home run hire. Like I said, it may not work out, but you have to, the commitment that Jim Sturk made to the program by putting out the bucks to hire a guy like that was very impressive.
It is absolutely impressive. So what are Missouri's prospects for this year? I don't know. A little too early to say. I did get to see some spring football, and the spring game didn't show much, but Bazelak, I'm convinced that working with Drinkwitz and being the unequivocal number one guy, I think is going to help Connor Bazelak and spending the offseason working as the starter. I think that helps his confidence. Working on deep passes, the accuracy of his deep passes is going to help Missouri. What's optimistic when you're talking Missouri football? Is it third, in the East? I mean, do you have to slot them there automatically behind Florida and Georgia, or Georgia and Florida, and above the rest? That's probably the easy thing to do without having studied it much. But that's not a bad place to start. If that's your starting spot for Missouri in terms of perception, somewhere behind Georgia and Florida, then I don't think that's a bad thing for the Tigers.
We're going to get some tough questions for you here in a bit, Blair. But I do want to talk to you about the Royals before we
Sure.
move on to questions. on your sports beat this morning, you had Lynn Worthy, Sam Mellinger, and Vahe Gregorian talking about the Royals, and I would recommend to our viewers to catch that on the Star. This team looks like they think they can contend for a playoff spot. I mean, they've gone out and gotten some quality players. I think the Isbel Lopez moves indicates that, we're going to win. We're trying to win now. We're not going to wait for a guy to develop. I'm optimistic. I'm always optimistic on opening day. But the division's really tough. But I just got to think maybe they could sneak in and make one of those last playoff spots. Is it possible?
I think it is possible. On that show that's now turned into a podcast, so you can find it on the Star's website. All of us picked the Royals. Well, three of us picked the Royals to victory total somewhere in the mid-70s. Vahe went off his rocker and picked 84 or 85 wins for this team. Look, I think you're right that it's something of a statement by sending down Nicky Lopez to optioning to AAA Omaha and making room for Kyle Isbell, a 24-year-old outfielder. To me, what that says is Lopez didn't have the type of spring they needed. He wasn't, you've got to compete for your job, and he did, and he didn't, and the Royals have an option. They have options. They have options at all their positions, but now they've got Whit Merrifield playing second base, which I think is a better situation for the Royals. They give up a little defensively, but they pick up a ton on offense by having Whit at second base. And really, Isbell's the one that's going to supplant or replace Lopez in the batting order. And your batting order just got stronger because you've taken Nicky Lopez out of it. So now you're only looking at Michael A. Taylor at center field is the only kind of bat that you might have to that's going to hit ninth, and you might have to hide a little bit. So to me, the bigger question with the Royals is the starting pitching. You like Keller, you like Brad Singer. You wonder a little bit about Mike Minor and of course Danny Duffy. He's been terrific at times, and he's just been hittable, very hittable at times. I think the optimistic note coming out of spring for pitching was the performance of Jake Junis. He develops a cutter, the Mariano Rivera cutter, and all of a sudden he's throwing goose eggs in spring training. So that's someone to keep an eye on, whether it's in the bullpen as a long reliever or if he becomes the fifth starter. That was a positive development in the spring, the development of Jake Junis. So I'm with you. I feel better going into this season than I have in previous seasons. They're not asking questions like, who's our first baseman? They actually have a couple, right? Who's going to be in center field? They know who's going to be in center field, and I do love the acquisitions of Santana and Benintendi. They've got a couple of on-base guys. That's been a problem. Watching the Royals these last few years, when they were winning the pennants, this was a team that was always putting the ball in play. The last couple of years, they were striking out a lot, not putting it in play, swinging at bad pitches. Just frustrating to watch on offense. I think we're going to see a different offensive-minded lineup this year. I'm looking forward to it.
I am too, and I'm kind of cool to see Wade Davis and Greg Holland back in the bullpen. Yeah. I hope they still got some gas in the tank. They both had good springs.
For sure. No, they did. But we were talking about this earlier. Matheny's not going to be Ned Yost and assign specific innings to specific pitchers. You're not going to have HD, whatever. It could be somebody else closing on a certain night. We'll see. But he hasn't tipped his hand on whether there's a surefire closer in the bullpen. Scott Barlow certainly has had great. Josh Stalmont throws gas. They've got some great young arms there, but you've got the veterans in Holland and Wade Davis. If you're a young reliever with the Royals, how fortunate are you to be sharing a bullpen with guys that have done it on the highest level and have achieved the greatest in baseball?
I was counting the roster this morning. It was 27. I guess the last spot comes down to Ryan McBroom or Ryan O'Hearn. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the way we're looking at it. It's going to be one of those two guys. And I don't, to be honest with you, I think it's a flip a coin. I loved what McBroom did as a pinch hitter last year, not getting the ball out of the yard a few times. But I think Ryan O'Hearn was just so unlucky last year, making all the solid contact and get a lot of atom balls, right? He has a terrific eye, but was just unlucky at the plate. If I had to lean one way, I think McBroom would get the nod, but no slam dunk there. But I do think you're right. I think it's going to come down to one of those two guys.
And who do you see? Royals won't need a fifth starter for a couple weeks. Who do you think gets that position?
Well, we were thinking all along it was going to be Daniel Lynch, right? And then, but then the spring that Junis has had has changed. I think it's changed my direction a little bit, and I think we'll know in the first few, maybe the first few games how the Royals use Junis. If they stretch him out a little bit, maybe they're gonna look at him for that. They're not gonna need the fifth starter until April 14th, right? They can go 2 full weeks without needing that fifth starter. If you don't see Junis pitch the 3 or 4 days before that, he's going to be the guy. So I do suspect we'll have Mike Matheny say something about that pretty early in the season.
You ready for some questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. First couple are regarding the basketball program and Conzo Martin. What are we supposed to think of Conzo now that all the transfers are leaving and Mark Smith would rather play a year at K-State than at Mizzou?
Yeah, so that's the most recent development, right? Mark Smith heading over to the Wildcat land. One of the things that I sensed by covering Missouri the last 10, 12 games of the season was maybe a stronger sense of disenchantment with Conzo than I was expecting. Off to the good start this year. We can rattle off the wins that he had that were terrific, that got Missouri into the top 10. And then losses that couldn't be explained, the 2 to Ole Miss, the loss at Georgia, which was just hideous, at Mississippi State. And it wasn't, the people the Missouri folks that I talked to were just turned sour pretty quickly. Like, here we go again, or we can't seem to sustain any kind of, consistency, successful, sustain the success. And, I was there the night that Jim Sturk suggested that maybe it's time to think about the extension for Conzo Martin. He was asked a question. I don't think Jim Sturk would have volunteered that, but he was asked a question about Conzo at the end of his fourth of 7 years on a contract. Isn't it time to extend? And Sturk went along with it and said, yeah. I mean, this is the time you would start thinking about that. So I don't know. This is one of those, maybe I'm too old and been around too long. I see the value of a coach besides besides what he does on the court. And Conzo Martin is incredibly valuable to Missouri athletics right now. He is, there was no better person to take him through the hard times of the pandemic and the unrest over the racial unrest over the summer. He was he's just a perfect model citizen for Missouri. Now, having said that, you still have to win basketball games. You've got to get it done. There is no reason why Alabama shoots past Missouri in basketball, or you can't beat Auburn. And I've always seen Missouri as a team that should be top 4, 5, 6 in the SEC in basketball every single year. Basketball means as much to Missouri as any place in the SEC outside of, Kentucky. It just does. And I'm still waiting for that to happen. It's hard for me to believe that Missouri's never had a bye in the SEC tournament. They can't finish in the top 4 to get that double bye, I should say, in the SEC tournament. I think that's something Missouri fans should almost come to expect, that they have that. So next year is going to be I don't think Missouri is going to be as good. We'll see what the transfer portal brings to Missouri. And Amar Davis is certainly a player to, you figure he's going to come in and start, might even lead the Tigers in scoring next year. Is he going to be a Cassius Robertson type of guy? And you hope he was, all conference level. He can score. He's not a great shooter, as we know from his stats, but he can score. You're going to need more, though. This team is going to need more than him. Let me say this. I do think Kobe Brown is a star in waiting. If I'd like to see some really good off-season development of Kobe Brown. He has a chance to be a real matchup problem for opponents. A guy that can step outside and shoot, but also has the muscle and the strength to board well. He's a unique talent, and he's a good one. I want to see. Actually, I wouldn't mind seeing Missouri, have him be your second or first or second leading scorer next year, depending on who else they get in the transfer portal.
For a follow-up question about, is there a reason to be optimistic that Martin actually is molding next year's roster into a squad he believes will play the way he wants the game to be played? And I'll say, I think he likes his recruiting class a lot better than maybe the ratings give it. There's no top 50 kids, but when Mike Anderson's best recruiting class was Kim English, Marcus Denman, Lawrence Bowers, none of those were top 50 kids. Is there some reason to be optimistic?
Well, I think one thing that's you can think about, and one thing I've heard, and maybe I wouldn't have heard this if I wasn't covering, the team the way I was this past few weeks, is that Conzo Martin didn't like the defensive buy-in on this team. This we always talk about. You hear announcers that are at Missouri games that don't see Missouri on a regular basis talk about how strong Missouri is defensively and how that's Conzo Martin's MO. I didn't see strong defense from this Missouri team. In fact, I think that's why Xavier Pinson fell into the doghouse when he did. He just wasn't playing defense the way Conzo Martin wanted him to play defense. And so Xavier paid for that by going to the bench. And then his body language stunk, and then it affected his offensive game as well. And then he became that, and that's why Drew Buggs was on the floor more at the end of the year than Xavier Pinson. So I think it's important for the success of Missouri and maybe the future of Conzo Martin at Missouri that he molds a team next year that kind of gets back to his defensive identity and makes things really difficult for opponents. Now, you can't win coaching only one side of the ball. I thought Arkansas this year played some pretty decent defense, and yet they were able to score too and get up and down the floor. And they've got a first-round draft pick in that Moses Moody kid, and other really talented players. So you wonder with Conzo, is there a ceiling on his success? He's had 1 year in his career where he's won an NCAA tournament game, and he won 3 of them that year at Tennessee, the play-in game, and then 2 to get him to the Sweet 16. And he hasn't had another year where he's won an NCAA tournament game. I was hopeful that was going to be this year. It would have been fun to see Missouri Gonzaga in the second round, to see Gonzaga against another veteran team, but excuse me, but it didn't happen. So I think in this recruiting class, if you want to frame it this way, by not having top 50, top 100 kids, you've got more of a chance to have kids that are going to buy into what you want them to do. And so I'm kind of my fingers crossed that that's going to be the case with the 21-22. That's what it is, the 21-22 Missouri basketball roster. And listen, Conzo Martin's future might depend on that. I don't think they'll be picked very high just based on who they're losing next year. I think it's going to be an opportunity for him to exceed expectations next season, and we'll see if he can do that.
Next question regards streaming on watching the Royals. Are those of us on YouTube TV or other streaming services going to be able to watch the Royals games this year? And I can answer that right now, no, unless I just switched from YouTube to AT&T so I could watch the Royals. Can a deal be struck before opening day? Your cohort, Sam Mellinger, had an interesting column about this the other day.
He did. I thought he wrote a terrific column because he's one of the people who've cut the cord, and he's paying more for the services that he has, but he did cut the cable cord. And so for those that don't have cable, and I still do, I'm old school. I've got Spectrum cable in our house. I don't like it. I wish I didn't have it, but I want the Royals. It's the only reason I keep it is for the Royals and for Sporting Kansas City. I get those with the Spectrum cable. I used to have it just to watch Spectrum Sports, but that's changed in such a big way over the years. So, but I think our cable bill is like $175 a month, and we're not getting $175 a month worth of entertainment from it. I can assure you of that. But that's what I mean. That's what it takes right now. But to answer the question, yeah, it's really a shame that, and the Sam made this point really well, I thought, in his column, that the type of fan that baseball needs to reach out to are cord cutters and other cord nevers. You know, people that have never subscribed to cable, maybe never lived in a house that had a cable subscription. Those are your young fans, the fans that are going to be lifetime fans. And if you're not providing your product to them, then I mean, what chance does your sport have in the future? And I think that's a big problem. I know it's a big problem with Sporting Kansas City. They think up to 30% of their fans are cord cutters or cord nevers, and so they're not going to be able to watch those soccer games on the whatever streaming service that you have. And what a kind of a mess that we're in with all this. It's great to have choices and great to be able to dictate how much you want to pay for your entertainment, but it sure should seem easier. I do think Major League Baseball, while it was out front and made when it came to its streaming service, MLB.com, they did it earlier and better than anyone. But I think they've made a grave mistake in not allowing those games to be broadcast in the local markets. If you're on MLB TV and you want to watch the Royals, you can't live in the Kansas City market. I don't know how far out you have to live, but you can't be in it's by zip code, and you can't be in a certain zip code, the 6-4s and the 6-6s and all those, and get the Royals. So it's got to be maddening for Royals fans. And I know Dayton Moore's not happy about it, and we know the Sporting KC folks aren't happy about it, while business suits argue over what who should be paying for what on a TV package. I understand the frustration, and I really feel bad for people that. Can you imagine having a summer and not having access to the Royals? That would infuriate me. Absolutely infuriate me. But it wouldn't happen. I mean, I'd find a way to do it.
Of course, me being a hipster, I'd already cut the cord and had the YouTube TV. I will say I called AT&T and got their streaming service and got their Wi-Fi, and they gave me a package deal so that the cost isn't too bad. But you also have to make sure on some of your sets that you have the Roku stick or the Amazon Fire Stick. So
right.
I agree. If I didn't have the Royals, I mean, I would really really miss out. So. All right, next question. Football recruiting seems to be picking up steam in Kansas City. What are you hearing about Coach Drink and Mizzou football in the prep community here?
Well, to be honest with you, I don't know. I don't know much about that. I just don't. But I do know, and this just anecdotally, that Kansas City's got some prospects. There's some kids in this town, both in football and basketball, to be honest with you. But Kansas City's got some prospects in this town. And someone help me out here, because I don't know. The latest Missouri football recruiting class included, maybe it was show of fingers, how many Kansas City high school kids? It wasn't a lot. But he did terrific in St. Louis. I think it's important. It is. You just, I hate to toggle between football and basketball, but Mark, you just mentioned the Missouri team of a decade ago, the basketball team that included Marcus Dedman and Dixon and that group. And look, they weren't certainly not all from Kansas City, but a couple of big pieces, few big pieces of that team were from Kansas City. And I think we understand. I've lived in Kansas City for 32 years now, and for 32 years, I've heard about the fence that needs to go up around the state of Missouri, and I've heard about just doing everything you can by every coach in every sport to keep the Missouri kids going to Missouri. But one thing I've come to learn over the years is Missouri's a different place than other states that claim to do what Missouri should be doing. And with the biggest population centers that border other states and border other conferences, and there isn't so much, and I'm saying, I think coaches learn this along the way too, that there isn't the allegiance to the state university in Missouri that there is in, say, Ohio or in Michigan, or in other, Georgia SEC schools, or in Oklahoma. It doesn't work that way. And Missouri's got enough population and enough prospects. If you kept all the good ones here, you'd field a terrific team pretty much every year, year in, year out. But so Missouri has to not only get as many of the best kids in this state as it can, it has to recruit in Texas, it has to recruit in the South, in Florida, in the Southeast. I think occasionally go into California. It has to go to the speed states to get, to get that type of athlete. And the early returns are, and just based on the ratings, right? The 247 and the Rivals ratings, Missouri has done a pretty darn good job under Eli Drinkwitz. I'll be curious to see where it goes from here over the next couple of years. You string together a few recruiting classes like this that end up in the top 25. And once you're in that top 25 in recruiting, then to me it becomes a coaching. Can you coach them up? Can you coach a top 25 recruiting class or a series of them into a top 10 football program by your style of offense and defense? So it seems that Missouri has the right guy so far. Just the returns are early, but they seem to have the right guy for it.
We probably won't get to everybody's questions, so I'm going to kind of jump around so we hit on many topics that we can. Kim English, going to be the head coach at George Mason. Do you see him at some point? The question is returning to Mizzou if the job is open.
Yeah, well, that's that's the first thing I thought about when he got the job. I've thought about this for a couple of years, no matter where he has been, whether at Tennessee or Colorado, Tulsa, wherever he's been. I always thought Kim English would be a future Missouri head basketball coach, but he's got to win. He's got to go to George Mason and get the Patriots into into NCAA tournaments. He's got to win. He's got to show his head coaching chops. For a first-time head coach, his age and the type of job he has, he's fortunate. It's a good job, program that's been to a Final Four. It's competitive. They take it seriously at George Mason. He's been given an opportunity now. And look, I expect him to win right out of the box? I don't know enough about what George Mason has and but if in a couple of years he's got them positioned well, then absolutely I can see Kim English. Maybe not the next Missouri basketball coach, but the one after that, or maybe there's another job in between George Mason and Missouri. Conzo Martin made the jump from Missouri State, or I guess it was Missouri State by then. It wasn't Southwest anymore, but Missouri State to Tennessee.
Right.
It's a heck of a jump, right? I think, and he did that, and he didn't go to an NCAA tournament when he was at Missouri State. He just went to NIT a few times. I think it's possible. Kim English, I really loved him as a player. That 2012 Missouri basketball team, one of my favorite teams that I've been around since I've been in Kansas City. My heart breaks for the way that season ended for that team, because that team deserved to have much more success in the postseason than it did. But he still ended up winning 2 conference tournaments, had a great run at Missouri, and got to play in an Elite Eight. So Kim's a great dude. I'm happy for him, and I, if he's successful at George Mason and he wants to be the Missouri coach someday, he'll be the Missouri coach someday.
I'm going to combine a couple questions. How much are you thinking coverage of games will change for you and your colleagues after the pandemic with Zoom and everything else? And then with all the issues facing print journalism, are there more changes coming to the Star which will impact your readers?
Well, yeah, we'll combine those. When it comes to covering events, through the pandemic and how post-pandemic we're going to be, that's a big unknown for us. We don't know how comfortable the teams have gotten with Zoom and how much they'll want to continue to Zoom meet with reporters. I'm hoping for something of a mixture of the two. One thing that we've lost and really missed in our profession over the last couple of years, year and a half, has been the access to players through, in baseball, the clubhouse, in football, the locker room. in college basketball, you don't go into the locker room, but at Missouri, they'll bring half dozen football players out into the lobby after a practice, and it's just not that way. Instead, it's they run through a couple of players on a 4 or 5 minute Zoom call, and that's it. So I'm hoping for for the sake of what I do, that we can get back to a more familiar situation when it comes to interviewing players. I really miss Chiefs games. We found we get more information and have more productivity in the locker room after a Chiefs game than we do combine the 5 other days of availability for the Chiefs. But just being in the locker room for half an hour after a Chiefs game, walking from player to player, asking them questions about what happened, and that's how you get to know the players. And we really miss that. I do hope that comes back. As for the print product and the journalism, we can do a whole show on that. Our deadlines now for the print editions of the Kansas City Star are in the late afternoon. So we were talking earlier this week. Will the Royals opening day game get into the Friday newspaper? The game starts at 3:00 in the afternoon. I don't think it's going to be. I don't think that's going to be in the paper on Friday. We'll have some story about fans back at Kauffman, and baseball's back, and and if the game ends quickly enough, maybe we can slam a score in there. But there won't be a game story. It'll be online right after the game, and there'll be columns by Vahe and Sam, and Lynn Worthy will have a terrific story about quoting the managers and the players and everything. But in print, none of that'll show up in Friday. So that's the world that people in our market, and I think across the country, are going to have to become accustomed to. What saddens me about it is the Star had a tremendous sport. It still has a tremendous sports section, but it used to be the print product used to be an award-winning print product section. It's just not going to be that way anymore. And it really does when I go to other markets and I see newspapers there have later deadlines than us that can get their night games still in the newspaper, it just breaks my heart. And I'm sorry it is this way. I'm sorry for people that spend money for the print product that they don't get what they want. I can't thank them enough for continuing that. They continue to find value in the Star, the print editions of the Star. Listen, if the reason that they're getting it is to get their Royals box score or their game story in the next day, we don't have that for them anymore. But I think there are still many reasons to subscribe to the print product of the Star, and I hope people continue to do so who have done that their whole lives.
Well, I want to say, now that I'm retired, I read a lot of other newspapers online, and I really think we have the best sports staff in the country, with you and Vahe and Sam, and the beat writers on the Chiefs and the Royals. You guys just do a tremendous job. We're really lucky in this market.
Well, we're old.
Yeah.
But thank you. Thank you for that. We do have a lot of experience, that's for sure.
Last question: when do we see Bobby Witt Jr.?
Yeah. It's funny that we were talking about Kyle Isbell. If you had identified a Royals player, when spring training camp was a couple weeks in, who was going to be a surprise opening day roster, inclusion, it would have been Bobby Witt Jr. and not Kyle Isbell. But because of the positions that they play, and the fact that Isbell has had minor league baseball experience to an extent that Bobby Witt doesn't, that's why it's Isbell that's probably going to be on the opening day roster. But we will see Bobby Witt Jr. this year. He will be in a Royals uniform at some point this year. They're doing something different with, not only are they having the whatever they call it, the alternative camp or whatever that last year was at T-Bone Stadium, and this year is going to be at Northwest Arkansas for a month. They're also keeping some of their top prospects in Arizona for the next month or so, and having them combine with Texas Rangers top prospects to play the top prospects of the two teams that share the Goodyear, the Indians and the Reds, right? Or Peoria, which is the Mariners and the Padres, whatever. Everybody shares a complex in Arizona. Those complexes are putting their best almost ready for the major leagues together as a team. They're going to go around and play each other. So you'll have pretty high level, almost triple, higher than triple, somewhere between major league and AAA level competition against each other in the month of May. Bobby Witt's going to be part of that. And so keep an eye on what Witt does over the next month. But I think Bobby Witt Jr. is going to be a Royal this year. And listen, injuries happen. Heck, Alberto Mondesi hasn't been able to get through a whole year without being injured. These things do happen. There'll be room for Bobby Witt, and baseball needs that. Baseball needs players like Bobby Witt Jr. to play in the major leagues, and so we can be excited about the future stars of this game.
Blair, we have covered a lot of territory today. I know we could cover a whole lot more, but we want to be respectful of your time. And we thank you for being a frequent contributor to our Zoomcast. As a reward, next time I see you, we'll get you a Westport Flea Market burger. So
there you go. I do miss that. That's for sure.
We sure do. All right. Well, thanks to everybody for tuning in. Blair Kerkhoff, you can follow him on Twitter at Blair Kerkhoff, and make sure you tune into the Sports Beat on Star website and hear his podcast. They're really, really great work. Hey, folks, this wraps it up for our Zoom calls for this year. Don't forget our golf tournament will be July 26th of 2021 at Lakewood Oaks. Please check our website, kctigerclub.com, for more information for entries and sponsorships. Everybody have a great summer. We'll see you at the golf tournament, and we will see you at the flea market on August 31st prior to the opening Mizzou football game. Have a great summer. Hope to see you all soon.